Jake Morrison walked down the long hallway of the UGS Harmony, his boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. The massive ship stretched out around him, bigger than any building he had ever seen back on Earth. For 6 months now, he had been working as the human liaison officer on this multi-species research vessel. Today would be his first big briefing with all the different alien species aboard the ship. Jake had been nervous about this day for weeks. He knew that humans were still new to the galactic community. Most other species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, while humans had only joined them recently. He wanted to make a good impression and show that humans could work well with others. As he approached the briefing room, Jake could hear voices speaking in different languages through the thick doors. Some sounded like buzzing insects, others like musical tones, and a few like rocks grinding together. He took a deep breath and pressed the button to open the doors. The briefing room was enormous, with a high ceiling and walls that showed the stars outside. Around a large circular table sat representatives from 12 different species. Jake had met most of them before, but seeing them all together still amazed him. Captain Zixth of the Veltar species sat near the front of the table. The insectoid being had 4 arms and large compound eyes that reflected the room's lights. What caught Jake's attention immediately were the sharp blade arms that extended from Zixth's forearms. They looked like they could cut through steel. Next to the Veltar sat a Quarian, one of the crystal-like beings from the outer systems. The Quarian's body sparkled with inner light, and Jake could see the energy projector devices attached to its limbs. The weapons hummed softly with power. Even the Sylvans, who were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful plant-like creatures, had brought weapons. Their representative, a tall being that looked like a walking tree, had several thorn launchers, growing from its bark-like skin. The thorns looked small, but Jake knew they contained powerful toxins. Jake looked around the room and realized something strange. Every single alien in the room was armed. Every one of them carried some kind of weapon, whether it was built into their bodies or attached to their equipment. He was the only one who had come to the briefing with nothing but a data pad and a recording device. "Computer," Jake said quietly to the ship's AI system. "Why is everyone else carrying weapons to this briefing?" The AI's voice came from speakers near his seat. "Standard galactic protocol requires all species representatives to attend official briefings while armed. Liaison Morrison, this has been the established procedure for over 4,000 years. Jake felt confused. But why? This is supposed to be a peaceful research mission. The protocol exists because most sapient species require the psychological security of being armed when in close quarters with other species, the AI explained. It helps prevent panic responses and allows for calmer discussions. The briefing began with Admiral Chen Dar, a tall reptilian being from the Draknari species, standing to address the group. The Admiral's scales were a deep blue color, and a plasma weapon hung at her side. She began speaking about their next mission to survey a planet called Kepler 442c. The planet shows signs of ancient civilization, Admiral Chendar said, her voice carrying a slight hiss. Our sensors have detected large structures on the surface, but we cannot determine if they are still active. We will send down 3 survey teams to investigate different areas. As the Admiral continued talking, Jake watched the other species around the table. He noticed something he had never seen before. Whenever there was a disagreement about the mission details, the aliens would unconsciously touch their weapons. When the Veltar captain disagreed with the landing site choices, his blade arms twitched. When the Quarian questioned the survey timeline, the energy projectors on its arms glowed brighter. The Aryan representative, a bird-like being with beautiful feathers and sharp talons, began arguing with the Sauridan delegate about which team should explore the largest structure. As their voices grew louder, both beings shifted their positions to better access their weapons. The Aryan's talons extended slightly, while the Sauridan's hand moved closer to the energy rifle on its back. Jake found this behavior fascinating and a little frightening. These were supposed to be peaceful discussions about scientific research, but every disagreement seemed to carry the threat of violence. The weapons weren't just tools or symbols. They were an essential part of how these species felt safe enough to talk to each other. The northern continent will be surveyed by Team Me, Alpha, Admiral Chendar continued. The team will consist of Captain Zixith, Dr. Mortak of the Quarians, and Liaison Morrison representing the human interests. Jake nodded, pleased to be included in the first survey team. He had been hoping to get some hands-on experience with alien archaeology. The meeting continued for another hour, covering safety procedures, communication protocols, and emergency evacuation plans. Throughout the entire briefing, Jake remained the only unarmed being in the room. He noticed that some of the aliens kept glancing at him with what seemed like confusion or concern. A few times he caught them looking at his empty hands or the area where a weapon might normally hang from his belt. When the briefing finally ended, the various species began filing out of the room. Captain Zixith approached Jake, the Veltar's compound eyes focusing on him. Liaison Morrison, Zixith said, the universal translator converting the buzzing sounds into English. Tomorrow we begin the surface mission. Are you certain you do not wish to carry any defensive equipment? Jake shook his head. No, thank you, Captain. I don't think we'll need weapons for a scientific survey. Zixith's blade arms twitched again. A sign Jake was learning meant the being was nervous or confused. But what if we encounter hostile life forms? What if the ancient structures contain automated defenses? How will you protect yourself? I suppose I'll have to trust in the team and use my brain to solve problems. Jake replied with a smile. The Veltar captain stared at him for a long moment, then clicked something that the translator didn't convert. Jake suspected it might have been the equivalent of calling him crazy. As Jake walked back to his quarters, he thought about the upcoming mission. He was excited to explore an alien world and see ancient structures that might be thousands of years old. But he was also curious about why the other species seemed so dependent on their weapons. Earth had its share of conflicts, but humans had learned to work together without always being armed. Tomorrow would be interesting. Jake had no idea just how interesting it would turn out to be. 3 days later, Jake stood on the surface of Kepler 4-2c, looking up at structures that took his breath away. The ancient buildings rose from the purple grass like giant crystals, their surfaces smooth and reflecting the light from the system's twin suns. Some of the structures were as tall as skyscrapers, while others spread out like vast domes across the landscape. The landing shuttle had touched down in a clearing about half a mile from the largest structure complex. Team Alpha had immediately begun setting up their base camp and preparing their equipment for the survey mission. Captain Zixith was busy calibrating scanning devices with his 4 arms moving in perfect coordination. Dr. Mortak, the Quarian, crystal being, was taking energy readings from the ancient buildings. Jake watched as his teammates worked. Both aliens wore their weapons as naturally as humans wore clothes. Zixith's blade arms gleamed in the sunlight, while Dr. Mortak's energy projectors hummed with a low, steady sound. Even here on this peaceful-looking planet, they felt the need to stay armed and ready for danger. The structures are definitely artificial, Dr. Mortak reported, the translator converting the musical tones of Quarian speech. The energy signatures suggest they are very old, perhaps 10,000 years or more. But some systems appear to still be active. Active how? Jake asked, making notes on his datapad. Unknown at this time. The energy patterns are unlike anything in our databases. We will need to get closer to learn more. Captain Zixith finished with the scanning equipment and turned toward the team. I suggest we approach the nearest structure. First, it appears to be some kind of entrance or gateway to the larger complex. The 3 beings began walking across the purple grass toward the buildings. Jake noticed that the planet felt peaceful and quiet. There were no signs of dangerous animals or hostile environments. A gentle breeze carried the scent of something like cinnamon from the alien plants around them. As they got closer to the first structure, Jake could see that it was covered in strange symbols and patterns. The walls seemed to shimmer with their own light, and he could hear a very faint humming sound coming from somewhere inside. Fascinating, Dr. Mortak said, holding up a scanning device. The building appears to be scanning us as well. I am detecting energy beams focused on our location. Defensive systems? Captain Zixith asked, his blade arms extending slightly. Possibly. The energy levels are very low, almost like the building is just trying to learn about us. Jake felt excited rather than worried. Maybe it's some kind of greeting system, a way for the ancient people to welcome visitors. They continued walking toward the structure. The humming sound grew louder, and Jake could see lights beginning to glow brighter inside the translucent walls. Whatever systems were still working in the building, their approach was definitely activating them. When they were about 50 feet from the entrance, everything changed very quickly. Bright beams of blue energy suddenly shot out from hidden panels in the building's walls. The beams struck Captain Zixith and Dr. Mortak directly in their chest areas. Both aliens cried out in surprise and pain, then collapsed to the ground unconscious. Their weapons clattered beside them, the energy projectors going dark and the blade arms retracting. Jake stopped walking and looked around in shock. The energy beams had been so fast he barely saw them. His teammates were breathing but completely unconscious. And strangely, he hadn't been hit by anything at all. "Zixth! Mortak!" Jake called out, but neither alien responded. He knelt down beside them and checked their vital signs. Both seemed to be alive and healthy, just deeply unconscious. Jake looked back at the building. The blue energy beams had stopped firing, and the lights inside seemed to have returned to their normal, gentle glow. It was as if the building had finished whatever it was trying to do and was now calm again. He tried to wake his teammates, but they remained unconscious. Jake used his communicator to contact the ship, but all he got was static. Something was blocking his signal. He was alone on an alien world with 2 unconscious team members and no way to call for help. Jake stood up and looked at the building again. He noticed something important. The energy beams had struck his teammates exactly where their weapons were located. Zixith had been hit in the chest where his blade arms connected to his body. Dr. Mortak had been struck where the energy projectors attached to the crystal being's limbs. It was targeting the weapons, Jake said out loud, even though no one could hear him. He looked down at himself. He wore a simple exploration suit with pockets for tools and equipment, but no weapons of any kind. Maybe that was why the building hadn't attacked him. Maybe it only fired at beings who carried weapons. Jake made a decision that probably wasn't very smart, but he was curious, and his teammates needed help. He started walking toward the building again, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible and empty. The humming sound returned as he approached, and he could see the lights inside growing brighter again. But no energy beams fired at him. The building seemed to be watching him, studying him, but not considering him a threat. Jake reached the entrance without being attacked. Up close, he could see that the doorway was actually an opening that went all the way through the wall. The symbols around the entrance were glowing softly, and they seemed to pulse in a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. He stepped through the entrance and found himself in a large, circular room. The walls were covered with more glowing symbols, and in the center of the room stood a tall crystal formation that pulsed with inner light. Jake approached the crystal carefully, still amazed that the building's defenses hadn't touched him. When he got close to the central crystal, images suddenly appeared in the air around him. Jake gasped as he saw holographic pictures of various alien species. Some he recognized from the galactic community. Others he had never seen before. The images showed different aliens approaching the building, all of them carrying weapons of various kinds. In every image, the same thing happened. The building's energy beams would strike the armed visitors, rendering them unconscious. Their weapons would stop working, and they would be left sleeping outside the structure until they naturally woke up hours later. But then Jake saw something that made his heart race. In the newest images, he could see himself walking toward the building. The hologram showed him clearly, a human in an exploration suit with no weapons. And in this image, the building's defenses never activated. Jake realized he was seeing the building's memory system. It had been recording every visitor for thousands of years. All of them had come armed, and all of them had been turned away by the defensive systems. Until now, he was the first being in perhaps 10,000 years to enter this building while completely unarmed. The ancient builders had created a system that would only allow peaceful visitors inside, visitors who came without any weapons at all. Jake spent several hours exploring the building and recording everything he could with his equipment. The structure was clearly some kind of library or information center, filled with crystal storage devices and display systems. But without weapons to threaten him, he was free to learn and discover. When he finally returned to his teammates, they were beginning to wake up. Captain Zixith was the first to sit up, looking confused and disoriented. "What happened?" the Veltar asked, shaking his large insectoid head. "I think," Jake said with a smile, "we just learned something very important about why humans don't carry weapons to briefings." Back aboard the UGS Harmony, Jake sat in the Science Division's main conference room with Captain Elena Rodriguez, the human commanding officer. Elena was a small woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been leading human space exploration teams for over 15 years and had seen more alien cultures than almost any other human alive. "So let me understand this correctly," Elena said, looking at Jake's report on her datapad. "The ancient defense system on the planet only targeted beings who were carrying weapons. It knocked out Zixith and Mortak, but left you completely alone." "That's right," Jake replied. "The building's memory system showed thousands of years of visitors, all armed, all turned away. I was the first one to get inside because I was the first one to approach without any weapons." Elena leaned back in her chair and smiled. "And you spent 4 hours inside, learning about their technology and culture, while your teammates slept off the effects of the stun beams." "The building was incredible, Captain. It was like a vast library containing the history of that civilization. They were completely peaceful people who had developed technology specifically to keep violent species away from their knowledge." Dr. Zara Webb, the ship's xenobiologist, entered the conference room carrying a stack of research files. Zara was a tall woman with curly red hair who specialized in studying how different alien species thought and behaved. She had been very interested in Jake's discovery and had spent the last 2 days analyzing the data he brought back. "I've been going through the information Jake recovered," Zara said, setting her files on the table. "The civilization on Kepler 442c wasn't just peaceful. They were actively afraid of violent species. Their entire culture was built around avoiding conflict at any cost." "Afraid of violent species?" Elena asked. "But they had such advanced technology. Surely they could have defended themselves if necessary." "That's just it," Zara replied, opening one of her files. "They could have built weapons that would make our modern military look like children with toys. But they chose not to. Instead, they developed systems to detect and neutralize aggression without causing permanent harm." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "The building's computer showed me records of hundreds of different species that visited their world over thousands of years. Every single one came armed and ready for conflict. The peaceful civilization saw this as proof that most intelligent life in the galaxy was naturally violent." "Which brings us to an interesting question," Elena said. "Why are humans different? Why didn't Jake feel the need to carry weapons on what was supposed to be a simple scientific survey?" Dr. Webb pulled out a thick research folder and opened it to a page covered with evolutionary charts and diagrams. "I've been studying this question since Jake's discovery. Most sapient species in the galaxy evolved from either apex predators or prey animals that lived under constant threat. Their entire evolutionary history shaped them to see danger everywhere and to always be ready to fight or flee." She pointed to a chart showing different alien species and their evolutionary backgrounds. The Veltar evolved from pack hunters on a world full of dangerous predators. The Quarians developed intelligence while hiding from crystal-eating parasites in cave systems. Even the peaceful Sylvans evolved defensive toxins because their homeworld was full of creatures that tried to eat them. "And humans?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Humans evolved as persistence, hunters and social cooperators," Zara explained. "Your ancestors survived not by being the strongest or most aggressive, but by working together and using tools. When early humans encountered problems, their first instinct was to think about solutions and work as a team, not to immediately resort to violence." Elena looked thoughtful. "So when other species feel threatened or uncertain, their evolutionary programming tells them to be ready for a fight. But when humans feel threatened, we try to understand the threat and find a way to deal with it peacefully." "Exactly," Zara agreed. "And that's why Jake could enter the ancient building while armed aliens could not. His approach to an unknown situation was curiosity and caution, not preparation for battle. Jake felt a strange mix of pride and concern about this discovery. But does that make us weak? I mean, every other species in the galaxy thinks you need weapons to feel safe. Are we missing something important about how dangerous the universe really is? That's what makes this so interesting, Elena replied. Your discovery suggests that maybe the universe isn't as dangerous as everyone thinks. Maybe the reason so many conflicts exist between species is because everyone is armed and ready to fight at the first sign of disagreement. Dr. Webb nodded and pulled out another chart. I've been analyzing the psychological profiles of different species aboard this ship. During our briefings, I noticed that armed species show measurable stress responses when discussing anything that might lead to conflict. Their weapons make them feel safer, but they also make them more likely to see potential threats everywhere. Like having a hammer and seeing every problem as a nail, Jake suggested. Exactly. But humans show a different pattern. When faced with potential conflict situations, human stress levels actually decrease when they focus on understanding and communication rather than preparation for fighting. Elena stood up and walked to the window showing the stars outside. This could be significant for human-alien relations. If we're naturally better at staying calm in tense situations, maybe we have a role to play in galactic diplomacy that we haven't recognized yet. There's something else, Zara added. I've been reviewing historical records of human first contact situations. In almost every case where humans made peaceful contact with a new species, the key factor was that the humans approached unarmed and focused on communication rather than showing strength. Jake remembered his first day aboard the Harmony, when he had been confused about why everyone else carried weapons to briefings. Now he was beginning to understand that what seemed like strange alien behavior was actually the normal way that most intelligent species dealt with uncertainty and potential conflict. So what happens now? Jake asked. Do we report this to the Galactic Council? Do we try to convince other species to attend briefings without weapons? Elena turned back from the window with a serious expression. I don't think we should try to change how other species behave. Their weapons clearly provide important psychological security that helps them function in multi-species environments. But maybe we can use our natural advantages to help reduce conflicts and improve communication between species. How do you mean? Zara asked. Well, if humans are naturally better at staying calm in tense situations and approaching problems without immediately thinking about fighting, maybe we should be taking more active roles in diplomatic missions and conflict resolution. Jake liked the sound of that. Like being the neutral party that can talk to everyone because we're not seen as a threat? Something like that. But first, we need to understand more about how our peaceful approach affects other species. This discovery about the ancient civilization is just the beginning. Dr. Webb gathered up her files and smiled. I have a feeling that Jake's little walk into that building is going to change how the galaxy thinks about humans, and maybe how humans think about themselves. As the meeting ended, Jake looked out at the stars and wondered what other discoveries were waiting out there. For the first time since joining the galactic community, he felt like humans might have something unique and valuable to contribute, something that had nothing to do with advanced technology or military strength, but everything to do with the simple ability to approach the unknown without fear. Word of Jake's discovery traveled through the galactic communication networks faster than anyone had expected. Within 2 weeks, every major species in the known galaxy had heard about the human who could enter ancient defensive systems, while armed aliens could not. The story grew with each telling, and soon it had reached the ears of some very powerful and very skeptical beings. Admiral Korthvak of the Draknari Empire was not impressed by tales of peaceful humans. The Draknari were one of the most militaristic species in the galaxy, descended from apex predators who had conquered their homeworld through superior strength and strategy. They controlled dozens of star systems and maintained order through carefully applied force and the threat of greater force if needed. Korthvak stood 8 feet tall, covered in dark red scales that could deflect most energy weapons. His species had evolved from pack hunters who dominated their world through intelligence, teamwork, and the willingness to use violence when necessary. The idea that any intelligent species could function without weapons struck him as either foolishness or deception. The Admiral called for a direct communication link with the UGS Harmony. When Captain Elena Rodriguez appeared on the main screen in his command center, Korthvak wasted no time with pleasantries. "Captain Rodriguez," Korthvak said, his deep voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I have heard interesting stories about your species and their supposed peaceful nature. I find these stories difficult to believe." Elena remained calm, though she could see the weapons mounted on Korthvak's armor and the heavily armed Draknari soldiers standing behind him. "What specifically do you find difficult to believe, Admiral?" "Your human entered an ancient defensive system because he carried no weapons," Korthvak replied. "This proves nothing except that your species is either foolish enough to go into dangerous situations unprepared or clever enough to hide their true aggressive nature. I can assure you that humans can be just as aggressive as any other species when necessary," Elena said carefully. "But we don't see the need to be armed in every situation." "Exactly what a species would say if they were planning to gain trust before betraying their allies," Korthvak growled. "I propose a test. If humans are truly as peaceful as they claim, they should be able to prove it under controlled conditions." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the Draknari reputation for testing other species through combat and conflict. "What kind of test do you have in mind, Admiral?" "A diplomatic challenge," Korthvak replied with what might have been a smile, though it looked more like a predator showing its teeth. 3 species in the neutral zone are currently engaged in a territorial dispute that threatens to become a full military conflict. If your peaceful humans can mediate this dispute and reach a resolution without any weapons present, I will consider the possibility that your species has something unique to offer the galaxy. And if we fail, then the galaxy will know that human claims of peaceful nature are nothing more than clever deception, and future diplomatic protocols will be adjusted accordingly." Elena understood the threat behind those words. If humans failed this test, the Draknari and their allies would likely treat humanity as just another potentially aggressive species that needed to be watched carefully. It could set back human integration into the galactic community by decades. "Which 3 species are involved in this dispute?" Elena asked. "The Sauridans, the Aryans, and the Nexus Collective," Korthvak replied. "They are fighting over the trinary system, which contains resources that all 3 species claim to need for survival. The situation has already resulted in several armed skirmishes, and full war appears inevitable." Elena knew all 3 species by reputation. The Sauridans were large, aggressive reptilians who settled disputes through displays of strength. The Aryans were proud, honor-bound bird-like beings who viewed backing down from any challenge as the ultimate shame. The Nexus Collective was a hive-minded species that saw other beings as either useful allies or obstacles to be removed. "This is hardly a fair test," Elena pointed out. "These are 3 of the most militaristic species in the known galaxy. They've been trained by evolution and culture to see every interaction as a potential conflict." "Exactly," Korthvak replied. "If humans are truly as peaceful and diplomatic as they claim, this should be the perfect opportunity to demonstrate those abilities. Unless, of course, you are admitting that human peaceful nature only works with other peaceful species." Elena realized she was trapped. If she refused the challenge, it would look like humans were afraid or admitting their limitations. If she accepted and failed, it could damage humanity's reputation throughout the galaxy. But if they succeeded— "We accept your challenge, Admiral," Elena said. "But we have conditions. The mediation will take place on a neutral space station, with no weapons allowed for any participant, including security forces." "Agreed. The negotiations will be held on Concordia Station in 4 weeks. You may bring up to 3 human mediators. The other species will each send their most senior diplomatic representatives." After the communication ended, Elena immediately called Jake and Dr. Webb to her office, along with Ben Hayes and Carla Stone, 2 of the ship's most experienced diplomats. Ben was a quiet, thoughtful man who specialized in understanding alien cultures, while Carla was known for her ability to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. "We've been challenged to prove that humans can function as peaceful mediators," Elena explained. The stakes are higher than just one diplomatic mission. This could determine how the galaxy sees humanity for generations to come. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Who are we supposed to mediate between? 3 species that have been on the edge of war for months, Elena replied. The kind of species that consider diplomacy a sign of weakness and see every negotiation as a battle to be won. Ben Hayes looked thoughtful. What's the actual dispute about? Territory, resources, or something else? All 3 species claim to need resources from the same star system, Elena explained. The Sauridans want the mineral-rich asteroids, the Aryans want to build atmospheric cities around the gas giant, and the Nexus Collective wants to expand to the outer planets. Carla Stone leaned forward with interest. That actually sounds like it might be solvable. If each species wants different parts of the system, there might be a way for all of them to get what they need. The problem is getting them to talk long enough to figure that out, Dr. Webb pointed out. These species have been conditioning themselves for war. They're probably not in the mood to listen to reasonable solutions. Jake thought about his experience in the ancient building on Kepler 442c. Maybe that's exactly why humans might be able to help. We don't automatically assume that every disagreement has to end in fighting. Elena nodded. That's what I'm hoping. But we need to be prepared for the possibility that these species won't trust us, won't listen to us, or will see our peaceful approach as a sign that we're weak or manipulative. So how do we convince 3 warring species to trust humans they've never worked with before? Ben asked. By doing exactly what comes naturally to us, Jake replied. We listen to their concerns, we ask questions instead of making demands, and we look for solutions that help everyone instead of declaring winners and losers. Carla smiled. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is simple, Jake said. Maybe the reason these conflicts seem so impossible to solve is because everyone involved is too busy preparing for war to spend time understanding what the fighting is really about. Elena stood up and looked out at the stars. In 4 weeks, we'll find out if humanity's natural diplomatic instincts are strong enough to prevent a war. No pressure at all. As the team began planning for what might be the most important diplomatic mission in human history, Jake wondered if his peaceful walk through an ancient building had started something much bigger than anyone had realized. The galaxy was about to discover whether humans really could function as peacemakers, or if their apparent peaceful nature was just another form of cleverness in a universe full of predators. Concordia Station hung in the neutral space between 3 different territorial zones, a massive rotating structure that had been built specifically for diplomatic meetings between species that didn't trust each other. The station's design was deliberately simple and functional, with no weapon systems and security provided only by automated systems that could restrain aggressive behavior without causing permanent harm. Jake Morrison stood in the main conference room, looking out at the stars and trying to calm his nerves. In 1 hour, representatives from 3 warring species would arrive for negotiations that could prevent a full-scale war or prove that human peaceful nature was just an illusion. The pressure was enormous, and Jake could feel it settling in his stomach like a heavy weight. Ben Hayes and Carla Stone were reviewing their notes one final time, going over everything they had learned about Sauridan honor codes, Aryan territorial instincts, and Nexus collective decision-making processes. Dr. Webb had provided detailed psychological profiles of each species, but Jake knew that understanding alien psychology and actually negotiating with angry aliens were 2 very different things. Remember? Ben said quietly. We're not here to force anyone to agree with us. We're here to help them find solutions they can all live with. And if they refuse to listen? Carla asked. Then we keep talking until they do listen, Jake replied. That's what humans do best. We don't give up on communication even when it seems hopeless. The first delegation to arrive was the Sauridans. General Vextar entered the conference room like a walking tank, his massive reptilian body covered in ceremonial armor that probably weighed more than a human. Behind him came 2 advisors equally large and intimidating. All 3 Sauridans looked around the room suspiciously, clearly uncomfortable being in a space where no weapons were allowed. This is unnatural, General Vextar growled, his voice coming out as a low rumble. How can beings negotiate properly when they cannot defend their honor if insulted? Perhaps, Jake suggested carefully, we could focus on finding solutions that preserve everyone's honor, while also meeting their practical needs. The general stared at Jake for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether the small human was brave or simply insane. Before he could respond, the Aryan delegation arrived. Sky Commander Talonris swept into the room with the fluid grace of a being evolved for flight. The Aryan's feathers were a brilliant blue-gold color, and her large eyes missed nothing as she evaluated the room and its occupants. Her two companions flanked her like an honor guard, their own feathers bristling with barely contained aggression. "Sauridans," Talonris said, her musical voice carrying a note of disdain. "I should have expected you would arrive first, like scavengers drawn to a fresh kill." General Vexitar's armor plates shifted as he turned toward the Aryan. "At least Sauridans face their enemies honestly, bird. We do not hide in the sky and call it strategy." Jake quickly stepped between the two delegations before their natural antagonism could escalate. "Commander Talonris, General Vexitar, thank you both for coming. I know this situation has been difficult for all involved." "Difficult?" Talonris laughed, a sound like crystal bells ringing. "These reptiles have been trespassing in our claimed territory for months. There is nothing difficult about defending what belongs to us." "Your claimed territory?" Vexitar roared. "Sauridans, we're mining those asteroids before your kind learned to fly." Before the argument could continue, the third delegation entered. The Nexus Collective representatives moved as one unit, three beings whose thoughts were connected in a way that other species found deeply unsettling. They were humanoid in shape but covered in smooth gray skin that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. "Conflict is inefficient," the three Nexus beings said in perfect unison. "Resources should be allocated based on optimal utilization, not historical claims or emotional attachments." "Emotion?" Talonris turned toward the Nexus representatives, her feathers standing up in outrage. "Honor and tradition are not mere emotions, Hivemind. They are the foundations of civilization." "Your civilization is primitive," the Nexus replied. "Individual claims to territory waste resources that could serve the greater good." General Vexitar slammed his armored fist on the table, causing the entire room to shake. "The greater good? Your greater good means absorbing every other species into your collective consciousness." Jake could see that the three species were seconds away from walking out of the negotiations, probably to resume their military preparations. This was exactly what Admiral Korthvac had expected, that the humans would fail to control the situation because they lacked the strength to force compliance. But Jake had learned something important from his experience in the ancient building. Sometimes the solution wasn't to be stronger or more intimidating. Sometimes it was to be curious and ask the right questions. "General Vexitar," Jake said, his voice calm and steady, "you mentioned that Sauridans have been mining the asteroids for a long time. What specific minerals do you need from them?" The general looked surprised by the question. "Tritanium ore. Our industrial systems require large amounts for our expansion projects." "Commander Talonris," Jake continued, "your people want to build atmospheric cities. Where specifically do you need to build them?" "The gas giant Kepler-7 has the perfect atmospheric composition for our floating cities," Talonris replied, though she looked confused about why a human was asking these details. "And the Nexus Collective," Jake said, turning to the three connected beings. "You want to expand to the outer planets. What do you need them for?" "Agricultural development and population expansion," they answered. "The outer worlds have suitable climates for our colonization requirements." Ben and Carla were beginning to smile as they realized what Jake was doing. Instead of trying to referee an argument about who had the right to claim territory, he was finding out what each species actually needed. "Let me make sure I understand," Jake said, pulling out a star chart and projecting it in the center of the room. "General Vexitar, your people need the asteroid belt for mining tritanium ore. Commander Talonris, your people need the gas giant for atmospheric cities, and the Nexus Collective needs the outer planets for colonies." The three delegations looked at the chart, then at each other, then back at the chart. That is correct, General Vextar said slowly. But you're all fighting for control of the entire system, Carla added, when actually each of you wants a different part of it. The principle of territorial sovereignty requires, Talanaris began, then stopped as the implication sank in. Territorial claims are inefficient when resources can be shared, the Nexus beings said, though they sounded uncertain for the first time. Jake looked around the room at three groups of beings who had been preparing for war over a misunderstanding. What if each species controlled the part of the system they actually needed? The Sauridans could have mining rights to the asteroids, the Aryans could build their cities around the gas giant, and the Nexus Collective could colonize the outer planets. But what about system defense? General Vextar asked. Who would control the space lanes and military positions? What if you shared that responsibility, Ben suggested. Each species could patrol and defend the areas they control, with agreements for mutual support if outside threats appeared. Commander Talanaris was quiet for several minutes, her sharp eyes studying the star chart. Finally, she spoke. This could preserve Aryan honor while achieving our expansion goals. But how do we ensure the other species will not expand beyond their agreed territories? Monitoring systems, the Nexus beings replied. Automated sensors that all three species help maintain, efficient and neutral. And regular meetings to address any problems before they become conflicts, Carla added, with human mediators present if needed. General Vextar crossed his massive arms and thought for a long time. This is not the solution I expected, but it gives Sauridans what we need while avoiding a costly war that would waste resources we could use for building. The negotiations continued for 6 more hours, working out details of boundaries, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. By the end, the three species had not only avoided war, but had created a framework for cooperation that could benefit all of them. As the alien delegations prepared to return to their ships, Commander Talanaris approached Jake. Human, I admit I was skeptical about your people's claims of peaceful nature. But you have shown that strength can come from understanding rather than weapons. General Vextar nodded his massive head. Sauridans respect strength in all its forms. Today, you have shown a kind of strength we had not considered. Efficient problem-solving, the Nexus beings added. Your species may have valuable applications in future diplomatic scenarios. 6 months later, Jake stood in the same briefing room aboard the UGS Harmony where his story had begun, but now the room contained something that had never existed before in galactic history, a section where beings could sit without weapons if they chose to do so. Admiral Korthvak's image appeared on the main communication screen, and Jake was surprised to see that the Draknari leader looked almost pleased. The Galactic Council has ratified the Morrison Protocol, Korthvak announced. All species may continue to carry weapons to official